While the darkness over Tehran was pierced by expensive pyrotechnics this February, the atmosphere felt less like a birthday and more like a final farewell. The traditional 22 Bahman celebrations were meant to project an image of ironclad stability, but the reality on the ground told a story of deep-seated fractures. High above the city, the artificial lights of the regime's fireworks were met with a much more organic and powerful force, the collective voice of a city in revolt. From every balcony and rooftop, the thunderous chants of death to the dictator surged, creating a wall of sound that no state-run loudspeaker could hope to pierce. This specific night, February 10, 2026, will likely be remembered by historians as the moment the clerical leadership realized they had lost the psychological war for their own capital. The explosions in the sky were mere chemical reactions, but the shifting paradigm in the streets represented a permanent social explosion. The invisible barrier of intimidation that once held the populace in check was not just cracked, it was completely dismantled during these hours of darkness. Angry citizens recorded the events on their mobile devices, vowing that these images would serve as evidence for a future without the current leadership. This wasn't a localized skirmish or a minor disagreement over policy. It was the final rejection of a nearly 5-decade-long experiment in governance. The regime's attempt to drown out dissent with celebratory noise became a tragic irony, as the fireworks effectively provided a rhythmic backdrop for the calls for its downfall. By using state resources to bus in supporters, the government tried to manufacture legitimacy, but the sheer volume of organic protest rendered the exercise futile. Our internal data and satellite surveillance reveal a fundamental evolution in how the Iranian public now engages in civil disobedience. No longer are people simply marching in the crosshairs of security forces. They have pioneered what we call multidimensional resistance. This strategy involves utilizing the safety of private architecture, windows, and high-rises to conduct a sonic offensive that the Revolutionary Guard cannot stop with traditional tactics. Even in the affluent sectors of western Tehran, which were once thought to be insulated from such unrest, the level of defiance has reached a fever pitch. Geolocation analysis has verified the use of sophisticated sound suppression technology by the state near major landmarks like the Malad Tower. Yet rather than scattering the crowds, these military-grade sonic blasts seem to act as a catalyst for even more aggressive and coordinated chanting. The state's attempt to camouflage the sounds of rebellion under the guise of national pride backfired spectacularly, revealing the depth of the internal rot. Perhaps the most significant development of this night was the emergence of a powerful, unified call for the return of the Pahlavi legacy. Hearing slogans in favor of the former monarchy on the very anniversary of its overthrow represents the ultimate ideological defeat for the 1979 revolution. This isn't just a political pivot, it is a total cultural disavowal of everything the current system has attempted to build over the last 47 years. The people are explicitly rejecting the chaos or us narrative by pointing toward a historical order they now view with profound nostalgia. The cry for a return to a pre-revolutionary identity has spread with the speed of a digital virus, crossing every provincial border in the country. It is an asymmetric nightmare for the military. They can deploy tanks to the streets, but they cannot wage war against a citizen standing in a 15th-story window. While the verbal war raged on, the physical infrastructure of the capital began to experience what looked like a systemic meltdown. Strategic energy grids and high-profile commercial hubs linked to the ruling elite were hit by a series of unexplained and synchronized infernos. Satellite imagery confirms that these were not random accidents, but appeared to be part of a calculated campaign of internal sabotage. The inability of emergency services to reach these locations in time suggests a breakdown in the state's command and control structure. There are growing whispers that elements within the security apparatus may be intentionally allowing this collapse to accelerate from the inside. To claim that multiple critical gas lines failed simultaneously across a massive metropolis is a narrative that even the regime's staunchest allies find hard to believe.
What we are witnessing is the beginning of a domestic conflict where the state's physical grip on power is being burned away at the edges. The official response to this crumbling reality was a desperate and almost comical attempt to retreat into a digital fantasy world. State media released heavily manipulated videos that looked more like cinematic gaming trailers than actual military intelligence. By recirculating ancient missile test footage and labeling it as new hypersonic technology, the regime unintentionally broadcasted its own technological exhaustion. A confident power does not need to use low-budget CGI to prove its relevance to its own citizens or the international community. These digital bluffs failed to intimidate a populace that has already stared down the barrel of live ammunition in the streets. Even the high-tech light displays at the Malad Tower could not hide the fact that the audio track of the city was dominated by revolutionary fervor. This visual-audio contrast perfectly encapsulates a regime that is polished and glittering on the outside, but hollow and decaying within. The internal instability has sent ripples far beyond Iran's borders, acting as a massive green light for foreign military planners. What was once a slow-moving diplomatic dance has transformed into a high-speed military encirclement led by the United States and its allies. The arrival of a massive contingent of F-22 Raptors and F-35 stealth fighters in the region is not a routine drill, it is the architecture of an air campaign. These platforms represent a level of technological superiority that renders Iran's existing air defense networks essentially obsolete. The Soviet-based S-300 systems and their local derivatives simply cannot track the radar-evading profiles of these fifth-generation jets. If these aircraft enter Iranian airspace, the targets will be neutralized before the ground crews even realize their radar has been penetrated. This massive air bridge has effectively turned the skies over the Middle East into a one-way street for Western air power. Furthermore, the integrated sensor networks of the F-35 allow them to hunt down mobile drone launchers and missile silos with surgical precision. The missile cities that the Revolutionary Guard once boasted about are now little more than static targets for advanced bunker-busting munitions. On the diplomatic front, the vice-like grip around Tehran is tightening through a series of unexpected moves in the Caucasus. The recent diplomatic breakthrough between Azerbaijan and Armenia, mediated by Washington, has fundamentally altered Iran's northern security calculus. What was once a volatile border used by Tehran to balance regional power has now become a strategic corridor for Western intelligence and logistics. This cold peace in the north has effectively severed Iran's land link to Russia and the greater Eurasian landmass. The dream of a north-south trade corridor, independent of Western influence, has been strangled in its infancy by this new geopolitical reality. Tehran can no longer offer itself as a stable transit hub to Moscow or Beijing, losing its primary leverage as an indispensable partner. Surrounded by a tightening military net in the Persian Gulf and a diplomatic wall in the north, the state is becoming a geopolitical island. The United Kingdom is also playing a vital role, providing the logistical backbone through its bases in Cyprus and the Gulf.
The deployment of Royal Air Force Typhoons ensures that the coalition has the necessary coverage to protect regional allies from any desperate retaliatory strikes. This is no longer just a regime change threat. It is the comprehensive neutralization of Iran as a regional power player. On a broader scale, we are seeing the literal fracturing of the Eurasian alliance that Tehran worked so hard to cultivate. The lock that Iran held over Middle Eastern stability has been broken, and the pieces are scattered across the geopolitical floor. For Russia, this is a nightmare scenario, occurring precisely when their military and economic resources are drained by the stalemate in Ukraine. Moscow is watching its most reliable southern partner crumble, and yet it lacks the capacity to intervene or offer a meaningful lifeline. The Kremlin's silence is a deafening admission that they can no longer protect their proxies when the stakes reach this level of intensity. China's approach remains more calculated and subtle, focusing on providing the regime with the tools for digital survival. Reports suggest that Beijing has supplied advanced tracking hardware to identify the satellite internet terminals being used by the resistance.
Yet China views Iran purely through the lens of energy security and as a useful tool to distract the United States from the Pacific. Even the most advanced Chinese censorship tools cannot stop the momentum of a nation that has decided its future lies elsewhere. One of the most telling signs of the regime's desperation is its sudden and humiliating pivot toward the Taliban in Afghanistan. The very people who once claimed they would lead a global Islamic awakening are now seeking an exit strategy in the mountains of a neighboring failed state. This isn't diplomacy, it's a frantic search for a bunker where the ruling elite can hide their assets and families when the end comes. Moving gold and currency toward the Afghan border is the ultimate white flag from a leadership that knows the ship is sinking. To see the Revolutionary Guard seeking protection from the Taliban is perhaps the greatest irony in the history of modern Middle Eastern politics. Meanwhile, the red lines established by the Trump administration regarding ballistic weapons have left Tehran with zero room to maneuver. The nuclear negotiations are now largely irrelevant, serving only as a smokescreen for the much more critical issue of missile proliferation. Without its missile program, the regime loses its only means of external deterrence and internal projection of strength. If they abandon their weapons, they are vulnerable. If they keep them, they remain a target for the most advanced air force in history. This paralyzing deadlock is fueling a vicious internal struggle between the remaining pragmatists and the hardline ideologues. One faction believes negotiation is the only path to survival, while the other is convinced that any concession is a death sentence. This civil war within the halls of power will likely destroy the regime's cohesion before a single foreign bomb is ever dropped. Economically, the country has reached a state of near total paralysis due to widespread strikes and a currency that has lost all meaning. When a government can no longer pay its soldiers or feed its urban centers, the social contract is not just broken, it is non-existent. The fear that once fueled the state's survival has been replaced by a sense of nothing left to lose among the youth. If a regime cannot maintain silence in its own capital on its most sacred holiday, its functional existence has already ended. We are simply waiting for the formal paperwork of history to catch up with the reality on the ground. The pyrotechnics of February 10th were not a show of power, but the final desperate flares of a dying political system. The Islamic Republic didn't mark its 47th anniversary, it inadvertently hosted its own political wake. Every attempt to mask the death to Khamenei chants with explosions and light only served to highlight the people's victory. The truth is no longer found in state-controlled broadcasts, it is written in the graffiti of the backstreets and the shouts from the high-rises. The fortress that Russia counted on is turning to dust, and China's regional strategy is unraveling at the seams. The Iranian people are currently engaged in the final act of a long overdue awakening from a nearly half-century-long bad dream. This is the moment the map of the region is being redrawn, not by diplomats in hotels, but by the fire in the streets. The leadership is now trapped in a cage of its own making, surrounded by a hostile populace and a superior military coalition. There is no desert wide enough and no mountain high enough to provide a permanent refuge from this level of systemic collapse. The messages sent on that night of fireworks were not just protests, but the opening lines of a new national chapter. The era of fear has been replaced by the era of the king's return in the hearts of millions. History teaches us that when a nation collectively decides it is no longer afraid, no amount of propaganda can save a failing autocracy. The global community is now watching a historic realignment that will affect the world for decades to come. Every satellite pass and every intelligence report confirms that the regime's infrastructure is failing at an exponential rate. The coordinated fires at the energy stations were the literal burning of the bridges for the old guard. We are seeing a masterclass in asymmetric resistance that will be studied by military academies for generations. The transition from street protests to vertical resistance has effectively neutralized the regime's ground-based suppression tactics. International financial systems have already begun to adjust for a post-IRGC reality in the Middle East. The strategic value of the Strait of Hormuz is being re-evaluated as the regime's ability to threaten it diminishes daily. Even the proxy groups in Lebanon and Yemen are beginning to distance themselves as their primary benefactor's house catches fire. The sound war in Tehran has proven that psychological dominance is the most important terrain in any revolution. When the people stopped hiding their faces and started shouting the name of the Pahlavis, the regime's ideological wall collapsed. The use of AI-generated videos by the state was perhaps the most pathetic admission of defeat in the digital age. It showed a leadership that is so disconnected from reality that it thinks video game graphics can replace actual military strength. The youth of Iran, who are digital natives, saw through these amateur bluffs within seconds of their release. This loss of credibility has created a vacuum that is being filled by a renewed sense of national pride and identity. The strategic alliance between the U.S. and the Caucasus nations has created a permanent shift in the balance of power. Russia's southern flank is no longer a buffer zone, but a front line of Western influence. The economic strangulation has reached the point where the regime's elite are liquidating their local assets at pennies on the dollar. This internal capital flight is the clearest indicator that the people at the top know the end is near. The world is witnessing the rare spectacle of a revolutionary state being consumed by the very forces it tried to suppress for decades. As the sun rises over a scarred Tehran, the smoke from the fires mixes with the hope of a new generation. The final move on this geopolitical chessboard is being played not in secret rooms, but in the open air. No amount of hypersonic bluffs or CGI missiles can change the math of a nation that has reclaimed its voice. The closing gala of the Islamic Republic has ended, and the lights are finally being turned off on this 47-year-old illusion. We invite you to stay tuned as we continue to track the rapid disintegration of the old order and the birth of a new Iran. Thank you for joining Global 7 for this deep dive analysis into the fall of a regime and the rise of a nation.